Hello. This week we have Nick Crowe and Ian Rawlinson's The Fireworks and the opera The Walking Cinema on view. And today they're here for a Who's in Town talk. Thanks for coming and thanks for coming to this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There we go. So I suppose the first thing we should do is thank you for actually inviting us to come and do this talk. We're delighted to be here in Istanbul and being able to show our work and to talk to you a little bit about our practice. What we're going to concentrate on in this evening's talk is questions around language and power, and kind of specifically how sort of different language forms seem to express forms of power, and the ways in which these are sometimes kind of spoken languages, sometimes written languages, and sometimes things we might not particularly immediately recognize as being languages at all, but when you start to kind of work with them and think about them, they have kind of linguistic properties. And so the first slide of tonight that we wanted to show you is from a work called Welcome Sign, and some of it's in Turkish, so I guess people in the audience can read that. It's in 27 different languages, something like that. And it sort of is based on a kind of cultural form which exists within the UK, so which British people will be very familiar with, which are these kind of multilingual posters that you get. You get them in schoolrooms, you get them in kindergarten, you'll find them in airports, you'll find them at the unemployment office, and they always say welcome in 26 or 27 different languages. If you try, you can buy these online, and they're always, for some reason, an absolutely set cultural form. They're going to be 26 or 27 languages. So it's welcome, bienvenue, willkommen, and. And so this is a kind of, in a way, a simple inversion of the welcome sign, in which, because it doesn't say welcome, as you know, it says fuck off in 27 different languages.
Well, it says as close as we could find to fuck off in 26 languages. It's not possible to say fuck off in some languages. So we were asking some of our friends, for example, in Norway, how to say fuck off in Norwegian. It's simply not possible. It's much more complex than that. And you know, but the essence of the gesture that the phrase makes was what we were after.
Yeah, this kind of go away, I don't like you and go away was kind of how we... So we ended up having to break down what fuck off actually means in English, but it pretty much is that. I don't like you, go away. And so this is a text work, in a sense. It exists kind of for a sort of gallery presentation on the wall. And we borrowed this kind of, this sense of the global, which is also somehow part of the welcome sign. And of course, what is happening in the form that it derives from is this kind of sense of we're all one world. We say welcome and hello in all these different languages, everybody's welcome. So it's this kind of ideology of openness which is perhaps quite at odds with most people's experience of the world as they travel. They don't find the world is universally open, they find friendly people, and they find people who want to push them away and reject them. So in a way, I guess this was our attempt to try and think about the welcome sign and in a way translate it into something that was more related to what is perhaps a lot of people's experience of the new global world, which is not one of open arms and welcoming. It's about being pushed away very often.
So it borrows its visual form from an existent visual sign.
Yeah, yeah. Which this next work does as well. This is also perhaps going to be does anybody know what this is?
Close. It's a leprechaun. And a leprechaun is an Irish mythical figure, usually very small, and although he's always smiling and cheerful, he's a disruptive force. He kind of spoils the harvest. He will tell you there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow and will have stolen it for himself.
Yeah.
So he's mischievous.
I mean, one of the classic stories, you know, about a leprechaun, and these are from Ireland, by the way, it's an Irish mythical creature. You know, a guy finds a leprechaun, and you know, so it's like about as big as this microphone, and he holds him in his hands, and he says, "Tell me where your gold is," because leprechauns always have gold. And he squeezes him, and the leprechaun goes, "Okay, you're going to kill me. It's there. I buried it next to this cauliflower. It's here in the field." So the guy ties a ribbon onto the cauliflower, and then he goes off home to get a spade so he can dig up the gold. But because the leprechaun is magic, he can do things around this, and whilst the guy is away, the leprechaun has put a ribbon on every cauliflower in the field. And that's what the leprechaun does. He kind of fucks things up. He messes with the system. And we're kind of interested in this sort of mythical creature, and he kind of drifted into a work that we made, which perhaps if we show you a little bit of the work, you'll get a sense of what we're doing with the leprechaun.
في إيمان الله وزلتات السلام عليكم في إيمان الله شنو الحب والسلام بالخير الحب والسلام وعليكم السلام سلام كيف حالك؟ كنت شابس ما زلت في إيمان الله شفوتها وعليكم السلام ايش شفوها؟ كنت شابس يا شفوها سلام عليك سلام عليك ما زلت في إيمان الله سلام عليكم الحمد والسلام بالخير زلت سلام عليكم كنت شابس في إيمان الله في إيمان الله كيف حالك؟ شلون؟ سلام عليكم سلام عليكم يا شكوى سلام عليكم وعليكم السلام.
I think you get the idea. They go on and on.
For 72 minutes.
Yeah, we won't make you watch the whole 72 minutes, but it's exactly that for 72 minutes. They endlessly greet one another in Hebrew and Arabic, and they exchange these kind of what we call phatic greetings. So these are these kind of boundary ritual greetings where they kind of don't really have, they're just those things where you're saying, I can see you, I recognize that you're here, I'm now going, hello, all those kinds of things. The way we've decided to do this presentation to make it all run really nicely, I've just realized is if I can't pause anything. So this is why I moved us back onto the picture of the leprechaun, because otherwise we just have to have them going on all the time. And of course they're meant to be incredibly annoying. They're kind of meant to get a little bit under your skin. But they're also serving a certain kind of function, which is, they deal. It was an attempt by us to deal with a very known phenomena, a very known cultural and political situation, which is, of course, the ongoing conflicts within the Middle East, and somehow make a piece of work which would kind of get inside the intractability of that problem, the kind of stuckness of that situation, not by necessarily talking about it, but by using the leprechaun as this kind of disruptive opening, which enables us to start thinking about it in a kind of more complex way. Because of course we know the situation, it's horrible, and it's kind of been with most of us all our lives. We've all lived through this forever. It's been going on now 60 years plus. And so the leprechaun becomes a he's a way in which you can deal with the things you can't easily speak about, because it almost feels like there's nothing to be said. And we were interested in that, interested in the disruptive quality of the leprechaun. If you're thinking about language and you're thinking about power and power relations, often when these things come into language, you find yourself occupying positions which you recognize, or you find other people occupying positions which you recognize, and these positions collapse somehow. It becomes hard to construct critique. And so for us, the leprechaun, as this disruptive form, actually is a better way, perhaps, or better, maybe that's the wrong word, but it's another way to get inside kind of one's experience of that situation.
Yeah, he seemed, the leprechaun as an entity would seem to be absolutely the wrong kind of creature to send to Israel-Palestine to attempt to resolve anything about that. But then again, we were living in a political climate in the UK where we were continually being told that Tony Blair was going to go and do this. So
he looks a bit like Tony Blair around the eyes.
But we figured the leprechaun might be a more useful tool, as it turns out.
Yeah. So what I'm talking, let's move on to. Oh, they're not coming back. It's a studio shot. This is a production shot from a work called Citizenship. Normally people don't see the work looking like this, but we just thought we'd show you so you knew what was underneath the blankets, because that's what the work actually looks like when you show it.
These are survival blankets, which I don't know, maybe you get these in your kind of local leisure stores. They're kind of issued to people when they finished running marathons and they're going to lose body heat. But they're also part of the essential kit of, let's say, a mountaineer, so it's really for the purposes of survival. And one of the things we were interested in here, and we should say the slide that you saw just before we showed you, because there are loudspeakers and an audio equipment underneath there, and this sculpture kind of emits the sound of cicadas chirping as we recorded them actually on an Italian mountainside. So it kind of emits the sound of the countryside, and I suppose one of the things we were interested to explore here is the way in which a figure, a person, might become conflated with a landscape. So whilst these are quite clearly draped figures, they are also simultaneously for us presenting an image which is rather like a mountain range.
And I suppose there's also this idea that with the kind of political situation that we've had in the last just over a decade, and with the kind of ripple effects that kind of swept through especially Central Asia, and the phenomena of the refugee, one of our experiences in the UK was this way in which the refugee becomes somehow within the host country, or the country that receives them, they become synonymous with the place where they are from. So that it's like they're no longer people, they're a product of their own landscape. And there's something really, really essentially dehumanizing about that ideology. If you're able to take a person and reduce them simply to being some kind of part of where they're from. That's what they are where they're from. And so this piece, which is called Citizenship, this piece had a long evolution as well, which might be worth talking about, because for the longest time, the soundtrack wasn't Cicedas. It was taken from the sample questions from the British citizenship test.
Well, actually, it was just the answers.
Oh yeah, it was.
We removed all the questions and just had the answers, which gave it a kind of something like a concrete poem. At first, you couldn't make sense of what you were listening to.
These citizenship tests have been introduced. I mean, they were. I think Tony Blair brought them in. They were products of New Labour, and they were a way to kind of sort of throw a bone to the right wing who were complaining about immigration and saying that these people are coming here and they don't know anything about our culture. And so they introduced this new test that you could take in order to become British. If you pass the test, then you get to become British. And the test is a list of questions which have multiple choice answers. And what was kind of fascinating about the test to most British people who will be interested in this kind of thing is they're the kind of questions you wouldn't know the answers to anyway.
Yeah, I didn't get a very good score.
It's like, why did the Huguenots come to Britain in whenever they came to Britain? And was it to open a new church? Was it to found a vineyard? Or was it to farm?
Most of us would guess. Most of us...
Farming?
Farming?
No! And amazing ones, like, if I can't remember it verbatim, at what age do Scottish children have to take a certain kind of English language test? Is it 7, 11, 14, 8, 11 and 16, 6, 9 and 12, or 7, 14 and 17? It's utterly ludicrous that, I mean, I'm sure most people in Scotland don't know the answer to that question. Yes. Please, I don't understand the answer. So for a while, works like this sometimes build out of, you look at a word like this, and we're supposed to be talking about language and power, and it might not be immediately apparent from a bunch of survival blankets draped over some figures that this has got anything to do with language. But often there's a kind of genesis within the practice where sculptural works are actually coming out of text-based sources which kind of get left behind. They don't make it into the final kind of work. Yeah, this is JFK, who was also Irish, sort of. We have had an interest for a while, we had an interest for quite a while in the eternal flame, as a kind of cultural form. And of course, the eternal flame is something that you find all over the world. There's one in Moscow.
Is there one here? Is there an eternal flame here? Okay.
Not yet.
Well, you can look up online where eternal flames are in the world, and lots of countries have an eternal flame. There's one in Moscow. There's one somewhere in London. There's one. But when you look at the global map, there are a great many on the east coast of the United States. Quite why the Americans feel they have to have so many eternal flames. How much eternity do you need to invoke? But we, as we said, we're very interested in this phenomenon. It's a very iconic kind of image to present to the world. We're very interested in the monumental at times.
And actually, a lot of them are kind of American universities. It seems to be, you can't have a college on the east coast of America without an eternal flame. It's an absolute essential. And we found ourselves in Miami, and we'll turn the volume down. We found ourselves in Miami and realized that because we'd been wanting to make this work for a while, which existed kind of as a title, and it was called Two Eternal Flames, because we have this kind of interest in these things which present themselves as unitary objects. So if it's covering eternity, I guess, as you said, you pretty much only need one of them. And in Miami they have two, but they're kind of weirdly interesting because both of them revolve around JFK. One of them is in downtown Miami, and it's called the Torch of Friendship. And it symbolizes, it was erected as a memorial to JFK to symbolize the friendship between the city of Miami and all the neighboring states, all the neighboring countries around Miami, which are the Caribbean states. And
that's essentially all of Latin America.
It's all of Latin America with one notable omission, which is Cuba. Because there's plaques for every single neighboring country, but there's no plaque for Cuba. And of course, there are reasons for this, and it's not just because they're communists, it's because the Bay of Pigs invasion, which happened under JFK's government, was pretty much his largest foreign policy disaster. And for many, many years, actually the election of Obama was the first time, reputedly, that the Cuban community had voted Democrat since the Bay of Pigs. They were solidly Republican. So there's this enormous bad feeling in that community that had lasted for decades, 40, 50 years. And there's another eternal flame in Miami, which was erected to the memory of the Martyrs Brigade, and that's in Little Havana. And so we were kind of fascinated by this idea that, we got this idea that we'd like to do a video called Two Eternal Flames, and we find these two eternal flames, which are both kind of about exactly the same thing. They're both of them anchored into this historical figure, and actually in some way particularly into this historical event, the Bay of Pigs. And so we created this video which we'll show you a little bit of now, and then maybe talk about in a minute.
So the monument on the left is the monument in Little Havana, and the monument on the right is in downtown Miami. They're 2 miles apart. When we came to film them, we filmed them at various different times of the day, and I guess we were traveling light. We only had a fairly small, fairly, I guess, lo-fi video camera with us, but it did have a night vision setting, which when we turned that on in the evening, it generated quite an unexpected effect, which was this halo that appeared around the kind of bright light of the flame itself. So what we did then with that material was to collage the two source videos together into the same frame, thus forming, in effect, the symbol for eternity on its side, figure 8.
And so it's this kind of work which sort of tries to unpick the problem with the notion of the eternal, which when you first encounter it as an idea, you don't think of it as being located in a particular moment in history. And we see this work as being really bringing together these two historical monuments and allowing them to do what they're already doing, which is to argue about eternity, because they're both trying to commemorate forever the same event, one by omission and one by kind of declaration. And their ability to do it, of course, is partial. They don't make a perfect eternity symbol, it kind of flashes in and out. And so it's a kind of, in a way, I guess there's a relationship to the Two Leprechauns video. There's this unresolved conversation, this conversation that won't complete, that won't get you to a kind of settled conclusion. And again, it was just one of these kind of amazing accidents that you get when you see, oh my God, look what they're doing. Yeah. And we do like the accidental in the work. This was another accident that we encountered. It's kind of related to the opera which we're showing here as part of the show reel. And it's the phrase, follow our orders, translated into Chinese by Google Translate. And those of you who are familiar with the internet, which is like, I guess, all of us, might recognize there's something wrong with this translation, which is one of the characters is missing, and it's been replaced by, you see the bottom to the left, obviously Google didn't quite have a character for that, whatever they were trying to express, And so just put this kind of, I mean, I call it an envelope icon, but I don't know what other people call it. They drop this thing in its place. And we just thought that should definitely be a poster. It should definitely be put up on the wall. So again, it's this, you know, the kind of, this language of authority on the one hand. We'll talk a little bit more about the opera in a moment, but suffice it to say, the phrase "follow our orders" is from an American military phrase book. So we're taking a phrase from the American military and translating it into Chinese. It's already in Chinese, but just as spoken, and we wanted to see what it would look like written down. And somehow Google gets in the middle. So you've got the American military here and some idea of China here. And Google kind of interposes itself with this kind of mistake, this error, this sort of glitch within the translation. And we got very kind of interested in that kind of idea that, again, it sort of goes back to some of the stuff we were saying at the start with the welcome sign. This idea of this globalized space of communication, you know, it's like like the adverts you'll get for banks when you're in an airport. This notion of a kind of one global space, and Google, as much as any kind of corporation, is responsible for navigating that and negotiating that, and so finding this kind of weird little slippage where language kind of collapses to just iconography, which you might spot immediately or you might not. There seemed to us to be something incredibly kind of resonant in that. I'll just show a few stills from, because this is from a work called The Fireworks, which is being shown here, so we won't show you footage of it because you can see it all week. But we'll just talk a little bit about it. It's a video work we did in 2007, where we decided to stage an outdoor firework display inside an art gallery. The idea being that we wanted to put something in the gallery that was too large for the gallery, so it wouldn't fit. And so we were kind of approaching this initially very much with a kind of skillful idea about containment. So we want to put a thing that's too big into a space that won't contain it, and it'll be smashing against the walls, and you know, a very kind of spectacular, kind of violent thing. Our thinking when we were initially making this work was kind of concerned with the ways in which firework displays are used. I mean, you might set off some fireworks on your roof or something, but the civic firework display is a thing that is proper to the state or to a large corporation. We, as individuals, don't spend £50,000 or 60,000 euros on making a firework display. The people who do that have power, and they have economic power, and they have cultural power. And so, you know, in England, for example, you'd get this around New Year, you'll have big firework displays. So it's kind of connected to that notion of bread and circuses. The idea that, you know, the state will provide distracting entertainment for the population.
Yeah, most recently the Olympics. I mean, it would have been hard to imagine the opening ceremony of Olympic Games without fireworks. So it's very definitely part of the syntax and grammar and rhetoric of the institutions of power.
Yeah. But what also happened, and this, I mean, hopefully you'll get a chance to see the work, was when the pyrotechnicians turned up to set out the firework display, they kind of create a battlefield. And so on kind of sliding onto this language of state power becomes all this sort of really quite military kind of imagery. I mean, often if you're looking at the work, when we first showed it in 2007, and people would look at it and go, oh my God, it's like Baghdad. And if you look at it today, you'll go, oh my God, it's like Aleppo. And it constantly seems to be this work which will refer to wherever someone is being blown up by a military force. And so what we get in the end is this work that's dealing with kind of the sort of the language of the state, the language of cultural power, but also revealing, in a way, its kind of hard power underpinnings. The fact that this cultural power is often backed up by something else and something quite destructive. And maybe we'll go now to talk a little bit about the opera. I've turned him off.
أمان الله.
There he goes. Sorry again.
في أمان الله. في أمان الله.
About 2 years ago, I was trying to learn to speak Yoruba, which is a Nigerian language. I won't quite explain why, but I'm not very good at learning languages, and I was trying to become a better student. So I searched online for some language software in Yoruba and downloaded this thing, and it all went into iTunes, and I pressed play. And the first phrase that was in the phrase book was "stop." Weird way to start. Stop, okay. The next one was "stop or I'll shoot." And I was thinking, what have we downloaded here? And so we traced it back, went back to this language, learnalanguage.com or something like this. It wasn't from them at all. They were just like ghosting a link through from somewhere else. And where the files were actually coming from was an American Department of Defense website, which is called the Foreign Languages Institute. And they got this whole thing, all these Yoruban phrases, and oh look, they've got 64 other languages as well. You can say "stop or I'll shoot" in 64 different languages. So we spent a weekend downloading everything they got, and then found that they didn't only have audio files, they got these video files as well, with little avatar soldiers who will say things like "fi manala."
في أمان الله.
And again.
في أمان الله.
Just so you can learn it for when you're invading Iraq. Because, of course, what this language software is for is to prepare American soldiers for when they're being sent to a country to invade or occupy or whatever. And they say things like "fi aman Allah," but they say things like this as well.
لا تتحرك. ترى الجندي الأمريكي يقتلك.
Don't know how good you
لا
are.
تتحرك. ترى الجندي الأمريكي يقتلك.
So, I don't know if you can read that at the top. That's "do not move or the American soldier will kill you." So they can be polite, or they can be quite threatening as well. We were kind of very interested in finding this material, but I think the thing that most piqued our interest was when we started looking at the Chinese language software bit, the bit that prepares American soldiers for the invasion and occupation of mainland China, where you get phrases like this.
我们在找攻击中国人和联军的武器。我们在找攻击中国人和联军的武器。
You got that? We are looking for weapons that are being used to hurt Chinese and coalition forces. I just want to rest on that concept for a second. Who are Chinese and coalition forces? Well, I guess they're the people who are working for the government that America has imposed after they invade China and take over the country. There's no other way to think about we are looking for weapons being used to hurt Chinese and coalition forces except post-invasion. And so we suddenly found this quality within this material that wasn't just about, preparing people to go to another country and say, "Salam alaikum" and "don't move or I'll shoot," but actually it was more than that. It was about a political situation that you can't imagine it existing. It was a kind of dreaming, a kind of fantasy. And we then wanted to really, really start working with this material because there seemed to be some amazing kind of collision there between kind of the real world of politics that we know. Of course we know the Americans are thinking about what would ever happen. I mean, they're the military, they plan war games all the time, this is what they do. But finding the documents of it that only makes any sense, that you can only say after the war with China has happened, we just found that incredibly powerful.
Well, they're extraordinarily sinister to us. And I mean, one thing that is perhaps we don't have an example of is for every American soldier saying these statements, there's a native speaker in civilian dress with a range of kind of replies, some of which are things like, yeah, the weapons are hidden over there, or, you know, I refuse to speak to you. So there are different sections in these manuals that deal with different instances that the soldier might encounter. I suppose one of the things, we have a phrase in English called sympathetic magic, which this felt very much like, and sympathetic magic is a form of, what would it be? It's a way of understanding it's a way of making things happen by creating images of them beforehand. So it's a way of kind of occupying something either through different forms of language or willing something into being by like making a drawing of it or speaking it aloud. And in speaking it aloud, it's beginning to happen. And it struck us that this was something very close in spirit to that to say these things is kind of like they're rehearsals, and rehearsals tend to lead to performance. So that kind of realization within, as we recognized it in the material, became really quite uncomfortable for us, and we just couldn't let go of it. We kind of realized there was something very powerful for us in this material. We wanted to make something of it. So we began, in a way, one of the things that we wanted to do initially was not simply to explore the range of phrases that these soldiers and native speakers get to say, but the whole kind of totality of the environment from which they're presented. So it's not just the phrase you get the soldier, but you get him in a kind of Chinese street in this instance, and when they're speaking Iraqi, there's a very bright blue sky and a palm tree and a sandy-looking building. So the world that this is operating in is presented to you as a complete world, a thing that is already happening, almost.
I think that's the thing, is the sense in which it has sort of political and ideological opinions and values, but it also has aesthetic opinions and values, and that those two things seem to us to be very kind of bound together. And we didn't feel we could adequately really get inside its political ideology without also getting inside its aesthetic ideology. And so one of the things that we've eventually got to, and it took us a little while, was we realized that you know, these kind of American soldiers are saying these things, stop or I'll shoot, and do not move or the American soldier will kill you. But maybe we need to make them sing. Maybe we need to make them sing that. And maybe that's the way that we can start to crack open. Again, it's perhaps a kind of slightly disruptive strategy. We can crack open what's really going on beyond the apparent and start to reveal some of these values. And so this opera was built musically out of their phrases, like their phraseology, and they're very kind of small video files with really cheap little bits of sound. So they won't sing anything. They're not like proper singers. You can't get them to go la 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 or something like that because it won't work. And so we worked with the kind of, as it were, the inbuilt melodies of their speech to compose a soundtrack that they could sing to. So in the clip we show you, which is kind of about 2 or 3 minutes from the middle section of the opera, we'll just show that in a second, the musicality of the work is coming out of the sort of cadence that exists already. So in a way, as a musical work, we have to somehow credit the American military for the compositional input we got from the avatars that they gave us. I don't know if that's...
So the voices have been pitch corrected in a piece of software that then tells you what notes those are, so you can then transcribe those notes and then play them on a violin, and then you can kind of improvise around that.
Yeah. Let's have a little listen to it.
Где ваша София? Где ваша семья?
Mi familia no está aquí.
عندك أطفال؟
Да, я беженец. Почему меня задержали?
Вы арестованы.
There we go. So, thank you very much for coming to the talk.
One thing we didn't say was what you notice immediately from that is that the source files that we got, which you can see here, this is of a kind of guy in a cell. We isolated the faces of those and applied those onto kind of global media footage, which is all basically ripped off the internet. And that ranges from footage taken by soldiers themselves on their iPhones through to Al Jazeera, CNN, and so on. I suppose one thing was that we strung all these phrases together, we made them sing, but then they were stuck in these little cellular boxes. And over the course of 20 minutes, actually, that gets kind of quite hard to watch because they're never moving, they're always straight on portraits. So at a certain moment we just tried this thing out and it seemed to work for us. So this kind of language of ideology and power is kind of reinserted back into the kind of context in which these things are actually unfolding in the world. So yeah, I thought it was important to say that.
I think so too.
So thank you very much.
I think one of these microphones now comes to you guys. Did he say?
How long did it take you to make a 1-hour opera like this with all this
No, it's not an hour.
this creation? It looks massive.
Okay, it's not an hour. It's just under 20 minutes long, but it was technically quite difficult to accomplish, and it did take us, I think, almost exactly a year to complete. And maybe with that kind of artist, when we work very slowly sometimes on these kinds of things. We had other works that we were making alongside it, but it was such complex material that it kind of needed an amount of time to kind of filter into, our collective consciousness as to what the right thing to do with this material was.
Yeah, I think that part of that process is just to say, it's kind of, when we found this stuff, the China stuff and the Stop or I'll Kill You, it's so heavy that it took us a long time to get past it, and we knew we wouldn't be able to make anything with it until we'd somehow gone beyond it. So I think out of the year of making that, the first 3 to 4 months were lots and lots of messing around with different kind of approaches, just to try and crack it open and get beyond what the stuff actually was. Because there's a version of the work where you just show everybody the phrase book and it's amazing anyway, just because of what it is. But it took us a while to be able to kind of crack it open.
Hello. You just mentioned about the citizenship test in British.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned that there are some questions about how the Scottish students are being educated with British system. So is there any point that mentioned in those tests about Irish and British culture inside, or it's only about English culture?
Certainly the questions will tend to look at sort of things like, what is a member of parliament allowed to do? So they'll deal with judicial. They kind of tend to be the state. It's interesting actually. It's a kind of vanity, because often the state is asking the applicant about the state. So the test isn't really anything to do with British culture, and certainly there wouldn't be any question like, how many people do you think the British killed in Ireland in the 17th century? There won't be anything about that.
That's what I want to learn.
No, there's nothing like that in it. And it's more about kind of, do you know enough about the state to be British? So it's in a way, it reveals their ideology about what being British means, which is to be some kind of, it's like a mirror, they're just looking at themselves.
Did you get any different reaction among the viewers or the potential arts audience in terms of which they are about coming from west or coming from the east in order to their perception?
In terms of any particular work or just in general?
Just about your particular works that you showed us today.
There was one, actually with the opera, that we had an interesting situation, because we first, I don't know if it's an east-west thing actually, so maybe it's not the right answer, but when we first showed the work, we showed it in Dresden. This is the second showing, and given the fact that this work exists, it uses 9 languages. There's probably nobody in the whole world who speaks all these 9 languages. So it's a very nice thing that you think, well, actually, this work should be translated into the language of the country that it's shown in. But it was first shown in Dresden, and we suggested to the curator, maybe we should, translate it into German. That would be kind of, quite easy to do. And she said, really, no, I don't think so, because you've got to understand from a German position, having a soldier saying in Russian, I'm going to put a capture tag on you and you're a prisoner, and then you subtitle it in German, that's what we did. So it would read in this really different way. It would bring back all these, it would be about the war, it would be about 1945.
Vasika mentioned Pavel to you earlier. He came into my studios as an artist. I share a studio with in Manchester. He's from the former Czechoslovakia. And he came in and I had it projecting. I was just kind of testing it and seeing how it was going. And he stopped and he watched actually this sequence, which is about to start, which is principally in Russian. And I gather it kind of gave him a little bit of a chill, and at the end of it he said to me, probably what the American military is to you as a British person is kind of what the Russian military is to me as a Czech citizen, which is very interesting to hear. It really made me kind of reflect on that. It was quite, unusual. And I guess the only other instance I can think in this particular work, I showed it to a Chinese curator when we were working on it. I showed some draft versions of that. And I said to her, we're getting all this material off YouTube and so on, but we really can't find any Chinese military, and we can't find any of that. And she said, oh, no, we couldn't either. We don't have YouTube in China. So I think there's probably in the Far East, and certainly in China, there may be a certain kind of exoticism to this work, insofar as it's material that simply isn't available. So I guess you get different reactions.
I have a couple of questions. One of them is that I'm wondering if you have any concerns as to the permits of using footage of ripping off YouTube, having the logos of Al Jazeera and CNN and so on. And the other question is the nature of your collaborative work. How do you work as a duo? I checked out the website, your website, and it seems like you solely work alone together. So I wondered, how is that?
Well, I guess to take the first question first, we're kind of only doing what Andy Warhol taught us to do. And to take the second question, we used to work individually, we used to work separately. Then we went through a period where we were working separately and together. And then a couple of years ago we decided we would just work exclusively together from this point on, because we're just compelled to do so. And I can't really explain that in a way, but there's a kind of compelling relationship that we have that I guess in its way it must be based on conversation. So our practice is really based on the conversations that we generate between one another. And that conversation isn't necessarily just verbal. That can be conducted through the use of a camera or a pencil and paper as much as through speaking to one another. But we do a lot of speaking to one another. So it's based on that, and we wouldn't want to give that up.
I just want to answer a little bit more on I'll expand on your Andy Warhol answer on the first question. Yes, it is a thing, isn't it?
I thought that's an attitude. That's why I wanted to open up on that. Yeah, it is. You are following and we are following Andy Warhol, but still today we're in a different state, and we're talking about semi-capitalism. This has a lot of meaning. That's why I wanted to expand on that.
And I think also we're encouraged to think that these are essentially copyright questions, that these things are incredibly solid, and that it's certainly the case. I mean, both of us teach, And it's certainly the case that, you know, you'll kind of speak to students and they're terrified about copyright and they think they're going to get in tremendous amounts of trouble. But actually, there's a whole grey area around copyright anyway. Certainly in English law, you're allowed to quote things for purposes of critical citation. It's never been tested in a court of law as to whether or not that only applies to words. There's never been a court case to determine, is critical citation only literary, or can there be critical citation that is visual? And if you kind of speak to kind of, you know, and again, I don't claim to know all the law, and what I do know, I know about in the very limited context of the UK. A lot of the things to do with copyright are around questions of financial damage. So, you know, when I start making my own kind of Gucci bags and selling them, then yeah, I guess Gucci can say, hey, you know, then they're not going to buy the bags that we actually make or something. But with material like this, I don't think it, you know, I'd be amazed if Al Jazeera got upset. But if they did get upset, I think we might say, well, it's not really damaging you, is it? You know, it doesn't reflect badly on Al Jazeera. I mean, obviously there are other sources in here, particularly the ones that we've taken from the American military. And the American military might not like their language training program being used for this purpose. But in my opinion, what we're doing with it is examining it critically through visual means. That doesn't mean it's not something I kind of worry about, but I think it's not nearly as solid, this whole thing. Once you're out of the realm of kind of piracy, downloading films and stuff like this, where there's a clear financial kind of argument that can be made. When you get into like this kind of area, I think it's it's potentially a much more discursive kind of question. And I think, you know, I'm very happy you brought it up as a question, because it's nice to be able to talk about that issue, because many people are under the impression this whole thing is totally locked down. But actually the application of the law, certainly in the UK, one of the first things the judge looks at is, well, how much money have you lost over this? So they've damaged you? Was it your reputation that got damaged? Was it, you know, people used to really like the American military and then we made this video and now everyone hates the American military? No, you know? So it's like, is that as well? Another question at the front?
This is a question back, I suppose, to your methodology, and I guess it's curious how many iterations this went through at the beginning, and how long it took to get to something that was so subtle, and if that subtlety was there because if you did it in any crass way, you didn't feel like you were respecting the material, and if that took a long time to find that exact form of expression, and I suppose what you went through to get there.
It was tremendously convoluted. It's kind of unusual for us insofar as this is the first piece of video we ever made without turning a camera on. And it's, you know, at this point it's the only piece of video we've made without turning the camera on. And I remember spending, I mean, you didn't see it in this sequence, but I remember, you know, I was talking about exploring the aesthetic quality of the material and its embedded aesthetic kind of quality. And one of the things that I got very interested in, we got very interested in, was the not just the avatars themselves, but these kind of scenarios they're presented in, the backgrounds. And I spent the longest time on Photoshop using, you know, my kind of modest skills on Photoshop to erase the characters here, the soldiers. And there's a sequence in the film where actually an interrogation takes place. And you see a string of these kind of 5 cells across the top of the screen, only 2 of which are occupied by avatars. And we were only able to really include that in the film because for almost a year, you know, only a few months into the process, we were there using Photoshop to erase the soldiers, to see what these background paintings, because they're often paintings, I think, rather than photographs. I guess photographs would look kind of unrealistic. They'd look kind of like they were clashing with the nature of the digital kind of quality of the avatar. And we really didn't have any idea why we were doing that at the time. It felt important to do it. We didn't know it was necessarily going to make it into the film. But it seemed to us, as part of this methodology, you describe it, what we needed to do was try and understand at root what the nature of this kind of aesthetic was, and what was in there, how it kind of articulated something about its ideology. And I mean, one could speculate actually that these backgrounds have probably been sent out to China, to the painting factories that seem to endlessly email me because they know I'm an artist. Somebody somewhere on the list knows I'm an artist. And like many artists, you receive these emails saying, "You need oil paintings fabricating for you? Well, we can do that. Just send us a JPEG." And there was one point where we were very tempted to actually send these JPEGs back into the kind of Chinese image-making system and have them made as oil paintings on canvas, by presumably very talented people. But it was kind of very hard to know why or what that was for at the time. And I think it's a kind of instinctive thing that you just feel that there's something in this material that needs to be picked apart and weeded out and understood in isolation to then be kind of mapped back onto itself. And in this particular instance, it took a long time. There are other things which take less time, and there are sometimes things where you have an idea. For example, with the film The Fireworks, we sat in the studio one day and we knew we had this commission at quite a big, important gallery in the UK. I went, let's set a load of fireworks off in the gallery. And the idea is there in an instant, and we jump up and down and get excited, and to our surprise they say, the gallery says, yes, we'll do that, which we never really expected. And I guess, then there's several months of phone calls finding the right pyrotechnicians, and I guess one thing to say, in a way we had to compose this score for our opera, but the element of sound has been a very significant kind of feature in our work for as long as we've known one another and been working together. And so, for example, with the fireworks, when we sat with the pyrotechnicians and tried to work out what this display would be like, we knew we wanted it to be like a civic firework display, that it would be somehow misfiring, that it wouldn't be, it wouldn't build to a crescendo and a big climax. It would kind of go out with a sputter. But we found ourselves speaking to the pyrotechnician just as much about the sounds the fireworks would make and their kind of percussive rhythm being somehow slightly out of time, as we did saying, well, we want blue fireworks or red fireworks or big explosions. So that kind of element of sound was a kind of structuring thing for us, and very much part of the methodology, as you put it, that we might use to develop a work. But yeah, I think this one's probably one of the longer ones we've done, but it's not unusual for us to have material kicking around that we're discussing and kind of picking away at over quite lengthy periods of time. Does that answer your question?
At least a lot of it.
Okay. Thank you.